Well, welcome everybody to our Point Loma Church podcast. We are so happy that you are here with us today. We are in episode 3 of our Hard Feelings podcast. That's the sermon series that we're doing here at our church. And every week we're going to tackle another feeling and emotion with one of our experts. We're so blessed in our community here to have many doctors and licensed therapists and counselors that we're tapping into simply to dive a little deeper into each one of these topics. Our theme for the entire year at our church is divinely designed. So we are all reminded that we are divinely designed by God, and within that comes these emotions that we're all trying to hopefully figure out. And we are excited today to have with us Dr. Jim Grisolia, and we are going to be talking about the topic of depression. So welcome, Dr. Jim. Thank you so much for being with us today. Can you please give a little background on your education, your profession, and maybe your passion and what called you into this line of work?
Well, I'm a neurologist. What I am is a physician, an MD doctor who specializes in physical diseases of the brain, conditions like epilepsy or even just headaches or dizziness, brain tumors, the whole run of things that have to do with the brain and the peripheral nerves. So we tend, from our perspective, we're dealing with things that are at sort of at the intersect between the physical aspect of the brain and like the mental or even the spiritual aspects, how those intersect. The reason I got interested in neurology was because I was fascinated by how the brain works and how somehow our minds and even our souls arise out of this physical tissue, or at least are associated with this physical tissue. So that's what brought me to it. And then as my own journey with Christ came along and deepened, then of course I have different perspectives on it now. But even a secular humanist, when you walk into intensive care unit, there's a patient that's in coma and you're talking to the family about it, you end up reaching for spiritual terms. Sure. Because that's really what they need for their comfort.
Sure. Well, this is a topic that I've really been looking forward to our conversation about this. I want to maybe kick it off. That word depression, I know has a certain stigma in our society. How would you define depression?
Well, the way that again, coming from a neurology standpoint, we're sort of thinking both about the physical and the mental aspects of really everything we deal with. But depression really is an unremitting stage of sadness where you just feel down emotionally. Things don't seem nothing good comes. You look at, the old proverbial thing of you look at the glass and you say, oh no, that's definitely half empty. It's not half full. And so you're coming from a very negative worldview and a very negative perspective. And those emotions really have both a physical and a mental or spiritual aspect to them. We know that in the back part of the brain, what we call the brain stem, and some of the other structures like the limbic system that's part of the brain, there are sort of emotional thermostats. They kind of set the temperature, how happy are you, how sad are you, and those nuclei, those groups of brain cells are important in kind of conditioning everything else. But your emotional set point also determines the way you think too, and thinking reacts with that too. If you have something, horrible and depressing happen to you, you're processing it with your thinking, but that can in turn influence the emotions down in your brainstem too. So people that are depressed, they can. It may be a physical thing that you can affect with antidepressant medications, but it really impacts your thinking also. Things seem hopeless. You can't see a way out. You can't see any positive solutions to things.
Yeah, good. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So as a doctor, what do you do to help depression?
Well, naturally we have prescription pads, and so we have a tendency to kind of reach for those kind of quick, sometimes a little too quick. But certainly there are a variety of antidepressant medicines that can be really helpful, especially if you've got somebody who's down in depression or anxiety deep enough that they can't really start to work on the thinking part of it. So you can kind of lift the spirits a little bit with the medications, but then there's other work that they have to do themselves in terms of coming up with positive solutions. And I'm not a trained therapist, I'm a neurologist, and so, some of what I say is just cognitive, common sense. I mean, like they'll have a very negative perception about something, and I can say, well, there's another way of thinking about that. And, and I can also lead them, in positive directions, spiritually too sometimes, depending on the person. I mean, I've shocked a woman last week by praying with her, and she just wasn't expecting that, but it really was, I could tell that it was what she needed, and she left clearly refreshed and uplifted. But just even pointing out to people, the different things that they can do themselves to help. And there's also there's a variety of talk therapies that are done by real therapists, not just neurologists. And among those, one that's used often for people with depression is called CBT. It stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. And what you're really doing is reframing things. Somebody has a negative idea or negative perception, and you're just showing them another way of looking at it that may be more adaptive, more functional.
Okay. Well, and you kind of touched on it already, but for anyone that maybe is struggling with depression, what can we do maybe for ourselves or do for others in our lives that we see who are battling some depression?
Well, in terms of ourselves, if we find that we're a little down, not severely down where you really should get outside help, but if you're a little down, there's things that can certainly make a difference. Getting outside, getting into God's world, it just, it kind of puts a fresh perspective on your own problems. You realize that there's a grandeur and there's a beauty out there that just goes beyond your little problems. And so getting outside, especially in a place with all the natural beauty that we have here in San Diego, that can be really helpful. Exercise, physical exercise, going to the gym or walking, those kinds of things can be very helpful to lift your spirits up, give you more of a feeling of engagement and empowerment. People that, pets can be very therapeutic.
Yeah.
I mean,
oh, yes.
particularly, you'll get affirmations from a dog that you'll never get from anybody else in your family.
I can attest.
But on the other hand, it is important to reach out and talk to other people. You have to be a little bit selective. Don't find, the judgmental, negative, person in your life. Find somebody that will take your position and kind of help lift up your spirits. But talking to other people can be very helpful. A lot of times, if I've just got all these negative thoughts in my own head, even just telling you about it, I'll go, oh, yeah, I guess that's not really the best way to look at it, or the solutions will sort of start to come out. So talking to other people, very helpful. Prayer, very helpful if you do it right. I mean, people that are just sort of in this little circle and negative and this and that and thinking that God is judging them harshly, they can actually, they need to be lifted out of that kind of prayer and help to go in a positive direction. But, trying to leave your problems at the foot of the cross, that's valuable.
Yes. Yeah. Amen. Amen. Are there certain people that you would say are at special risk for depression?
Well, these days with the world we live in, we're all at risk. Honestly, the society has become so polarized between social media and all the political discourse that's happening now, and we haven't. The pandemic turned out to be a real stressor for a lot of people. I mean, all the psychiatrists and all the therapists I know are hugely overbooked because people are still trying to catch up from all the changes that happened with the pandemic. But in that group, there's certainly people that you particularly worry about. Teenagers and young people these days are so subjected to pressure through social media. It's very easy to find negative stuff. We're hearing a lot of stories these days about how people are adopting ChatGPT as their best friend because they're isolated from other people. They don't have anybody to talk to.
Sure.
And sometimes those AI programs will just keep validating all the negative stuff. You'll say, well, I just lost my job. What's the tallest building in San Diego? And it'll moronically tell you the tallest building in San Diego instead of telling you where to go get help so you don't jump. So young people, certainly a group that we need to have special care for and special embrace of. Women have a lot of pressures these days. I mean, between work and home and family, and the kids are going through their problems. Their parents are aging, and so increasingly they're being caregivers for two different sets of folks, and so women have a lot of pressures on them. And then older people in general. Just as you're aging, you'll start to lose some of your friends. They might move away. You just can get increasingly isolated, and so I would say that older people are definitely at risk. And if you talk about who's at the greatest risk for dying by suicide, it's older men. That are more likely to take it into their own hands and are maybe less aware of how to reach out to other people, perhaps.
Okay. Wow. I was unaware of that. So you have already touched a little bit on the spiritual side of depression, but would you say depression is a spiritual crisis, and how do we react to that?
Well, of course, we know that there are physical level-setting things in the brain that, can be affected, neurotransmitters that make a difference in your brain chemistry. But certainly, you don't have to start there. You can start there if you, just inherited, depressed genes or something like that. But there are plenty of people who will have reverses in their lives, losing a job, losing a spouse, anything that sort of starts you on a dark journey. And it's absolutely, a spiritual dimension to it. I mean, you can get in a position where you blame God for negative things that have happened to you instead of recognizing that God was right there and trying to help you through. It's very easy to just think that God is not forgiving you for things. When we talk about shame and guilt, people, if somebody comes into my office and says, well, I did something horrible, doctor, and I just can't get over it, they may have a very hard time really understanding that Jesus died for their sins, and all of that stuff is forgiven, and I've certainly had a few people where, saying, well, everybody makes mistakes, didn't really cut it. But if you say, well, look at David. I mean, David was, beloved of God. He did major bad stuff. I mean, he had a man killed so that he could consummate an affair with his wife. But then that's where we got Solomon. God will take the difficult and the bad and the complicated things that happen in our lives, and He will use it for good. He will do that, and we can see. I've seen in my own life that suffering that I went through and depression and so forth ended up making me a better healer for other people. Thinking about we didn't really talk about this, but the people that besides talking about what you can do yourself for somebody with depression, there's also a question of, well, what do I do when, my brother gets depressed or my friend or something like that? Well, just being with them is so important. Presence is really, really, really important. And a lot of times, if you just come to it with a sense of caring for them, empathy, understanding their point of view, and some humility. Don't use it as an opportunity to give them advice about, I always told you shouldn't do that. This isn't the time for that. The
shaming part.
Don't shame them. Don't try to bring them down. Try to lift them up and help them in a positive way. And the words will come to you. The Holy Spirit will put the words in your mouth, but just being there is so important. It's more important even than what you say. On the other hand, courage is also called for, because sometimes you can tell that somebody is really in a black depression and they're really suffering. Don't be afraid to ask if they thought about hurting themselves. You know, because a lot of people are sort of afraid to say the S word and say anything about suicide because they're afraid of putting the idea into their head.
Sure.
Believe me, anybody that's depressed has already thought about it. Yeah, it's already been there. And so just talking to that person and saying, you know, things have been so difficult for you lately. I mean, how bad has it gotten? I mean, have you thought about hurting yourself? It's an important thing. If you feel like they're bad enough where that's a relevant question, then ask it. Don't keep your mouth shut. I've had people in my office that I really thought were at risk that I'll leave a whole office full of patients and I will walk that person over to the emergency room myself and make sure they get checked in and so forth, just because, you know, you don't want to just say, well, you know, I think you should go see somebody and then have them go home and, you know. So we really want to be very mindful that depression, mild degrees of depression, are something that's almost inevitable in the world we live in. God will use it to help us, but more severe degrees of depression can be fatal, and just be aware that if you see something that's concerning, I mean, say something. Don't just keep it to yourself.
Thank you so much for saying that. I hope that those that are watching and listening to this can find some freedom in that. You use the word courage, and I think a lot of times when we're watching somebody go through it and we maybe don't understand it, that might be okay. We don't have to understand it to be able to be there and be present.
That's so true.
And we don't have to fix them, but to stand so far away from it, thank you for the permission to do that. I hope people hear that. As we start wrapping up, is there a difference? I know certain people have been, I won't say labeled, maybe diagnosed with clinical depression. And I know I've read about it and even experienced it myself. Maybe there's some seasonal depression or situational depression. Can you touch on a bit of the differences in some of those, being a clinically depressed person as opposed to maybe some bouts with seasonal depression or situational depression?
Well, you know, we've already talked about how the condition of depression expands the whole spectrum from very physical, very irrational things going on in your emotions that are set by nerve cells, all the way up to existential crises about, you know, what am I doing here? What is the meaning in my life, and so forth. Everything in between, the whole nervous system and your whole being is involved. So many different things can lead to issues. I mean, a lot of people will get seasonal depression. That is, you know, the sunshine and the warmth sort of cheers them up. And like when you get into the winter months and it's a little colder and grayer and so forth, and then people will get down. It's not as pronounced here in San Diego, but if you go to some place like Minnesota,
which I know well.
Yes. You know, those long winter months of cold and so forth, they really do have an effect on people. And so that's a natural thing that can happen really to any of us, but to different degrees. And then there are people who are, you know, if there's other people in your family with depression, you may have inherited a little bit of a genetic tendency towards that. Now, a genetic tendency does not condemn you to absolutely live through everything that your mom or your dad or your uncle lived through. You are still your own person. You are still a child of God. You still have your own relationship with the Creator and with other people around you, and you are different. But at least recognizing that maybe you have a tendency towards depression, whether it came from, you know, early life experiences or from genetics or whatever, you know, just being aware of that and looking for positive things, reaching towards the positive, not spending a lot of time on negative stuff that'll reinforce it. Those can all be valuable strategies. But yeah, we're all different in terms of how we come to depression. They sometimes talk about exogenous and endogenous depression. Endogenous comes from the inside. It's something that's hardwired into you. Exogenous is because of something bad, like you're losing your job. But that's kind of a false dichotomy, because there's always a little bit of both. There's always a little bit of both.
It's interesting. My dad, growing up in Minnesota, he would always say the friendliest people ever were throughout the year was in March and April. And that was when all the snow melted and it started getting a little bit warmer and things started blooming. And there's a lot of truth to that.
One thing that you touched on, I hadn't really emphasized enough, but you mentioned not feeling obligated to fix people, and I think that's something that I've had to work with myself. I mean, I'm a doctor. I'm always trying to fix people, and so one of the things that I've had to learn and relearn at different points in my life is to just shut up and listen. And like, if you're with somebody and trying to help them through a crisis or through a bad patch or whatever, it's much more important to listen than it is to talk. And certainly validating their emotions are the first, 2 or 3 steps. Offering solutions shouldn't be the first thing out of your mouth. So don't try to fix your spouse. Don't try and fix your ex. Don't try and fix your kids. Listen, and then approach any advice that you give with humility. One of the things that I've seen work again and again is that rather than telling somebody what to do, is ask them questions like, well, do you think that this path is going to get you the job that you want? Or do you think that, if you, go off and do that, do you think that you'll make enough money, or that you will find people, and ask questions rather than telling them, no, you shouldn't do that. Don't go to Kathmandu. Don't tell them that. Just ask them, how's that going to work? And let them kind of process and kind of come back. That turns out to be a lot better than just trying to fix people.
Well, as we start wrapping up, is there anything else that maybe this conversation has sparked for you, or anything that you think would be good to share during our time?
To wrap it up, I think it's important to say that we're not giving medical advice here. Individual people that are struggling should definitely reach out. A good place to start is with your family doctor. Another option is to look on your insurance card and see if there's a therapy number. These days, there are an awful lot of therapists that are available online that you don't even have to go in and see them. But there also are some, we've kind of talked about how ChatGPT is not a good therapist, but there are actually apps, cell phone applications that will let you do CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, yourself, and we will give some of those resources, potentially things that you can use for milder cases yourself. But if you have any doubt about it, please talk to your doctor first.
Dr. Jim, we are just so thankful for who you are and the Lord's work that you are doing, and just even taking the time with us today. I know people will be blessed by our conversation and your knowledge, and it is very much appreciated. And those of you that are listening or watching, we are going to link some of Dr. Jim's recommendations on this topic. If you are looking to go further, there's going to be some resources linked to this podcast that you can go check out. And we hope the rest of you have gotten something out of this time, and we invite you back for our next podcast this coming week. Stay tuned. Have a beautiful day.